Back to the beginning. Every story has a beginning, dear reader, so let me first start here before we go post-divorce. I think I was 5 years old when my grandmother died of cervical cancer. I remember living with her for the first part of my years. I remember her being frail and thin and bald, and she would always sit in one particular chair in the living room of my aunt's house where we lived. As an adult, I would learn that rather than lose her hair to the cancer that was eating away at her body, she cut her hair off. As my sister puts it, she had long plaits she wore in her head, and we woke up one morning and they were gone. I guess in some ways I am my grandmother's daughter, as I would refuse to let cancer take my hair and do the same when my time came. I don't remember much of those primitive years for whatever reason, but I do know I did not live with my mother. As most stories of Caribbean children go, I was sent to live with my sister and grandmother so my mother could work. I would see my mother on weekends, and I would later go live with my mother and other siblings in the tiny apartment in Kingston we shared that one neighbor described as the garage of the building that housed it. Now that I think about it, there were only 2 rooms in the apartment. How my mother raised 9 of us is a mystery to me. I would spend holidays at my aunt's after I moved back with my mom, and it was always sort of a getaway for me. You see, my aunt was the only person I knew at the time that owned a house. We lived in a garage. The people in the yard we lived in similar apartments, and my cousins who lived near to my aunt lived in what we called the scheme yard, short for what was called a housing scheme. The houses were attached to each other, and to us it was an unusual thing, though it's not so unusual to me now, as they are very much like the brownstones here in America. So back to my aunt, she was the only person I knew that had a standalone house in a yard by itself. And to me, it was a palace. I loved visiting her. She had a TV I didn't have to share with anyone. And I could watch her VHS tapes of Flashdance and Pelly, and she loved having me visit. I also loved visiting my aunt because she was a dancer, a trained dancer. I don't recall ever seeing her dance, but I loved to pore over her photo albums looking at pictures of her in her tutu and costumes from the various performances she'd been in. My aunt was the only person I knew to have participated in the famed mass games. She fascinated my 9-year-old self. There was another reason I loved looking at my aunt's photo albums. She'd gone to a university and there were tons of photos of her in bell-bottoms and her looking cool in her Iowa State University sweatshirt. She was the only person I knew that had studied abroad, and in all my worldly innocence, I dreamed that someday I would go to the same university as my aunt. While my mother may have pushed me to study and encouraged me to get an education, I guess this all started with my aunt and her Iowa State University of Sheffield sweatshirt. I was a terrible student in primary school. The only thing I was good at was spelling and reading. Afternoon sessions at the Winford Gardens primary 4A class was a source of entertainment for my classmates. It was the time I would get lashes for not knowing my social studies or science or anything besides spelling for that matter. I hated my class teacher. She somehow convinced my mom I needed to attend the extra lessons she offered after school to prepare me for the common entrance exams. I once told her off during the lessons, and she sent me home to return with my mother. I pretended for days that I was still going, and my mom was none the wiser as long as I came home at the right time. I almost got away with it until the nosy woman who cleaned the school saw my mom and told her, "Why are cleaners always nosy?" Anyway, maybe her extra lessons worked, or her embarrassing me in front of the class every day worked. Who knows? We all were pleasantly surprised, even me, when I wrote the common entrance exams and gained a spot at the Bishop's High School. The BHS was steeped in tradition and known for producing some of the most brilliant minds Guyana has ever seen. I did not think I was brilliant, and the entire time I was there, I felt like a fraud. Children of the elite attended Bishop's. There were friends whose mother and siblings had gone there, so it was a family tradition, and the friends whose parents were judges and lawyers or doctors. There were also the friends who had one relative or the other working for CARICOM, and then there was me. Sometime after I started at Bishop's, we moved. My mother had been building a house for years with the help of my brothers. It was no bigger than the garage we lived in Kingston, but it was ours. At least there weren't so many of us to fit into. By the time it was done, most of my siblings had gone off on their own. Our house was in Sofia, a squatting area that was growing popular among people who were wary of waiting for a house lot from the government or just couldn't afford one. There was no electricity, no water, and no paved roads. Unless there was a house there and someone had cleared it, everything was cane fields and trees. There were many times when I went to school I would go barefoot when it rained so I wouldn't ruin my shoes. Mud was easier to clean off your feet. My mother convinced herself this was no place for me to attend bishops she hated. I had to study by kerosene lamp, and I walked for miles every day just to get the bus to and from school. Sophia also had a reputation for harboring unsavory characters, and I guess she was trying to protect me from this. I remember her pulling me out of class when I was in first form. I had just started high school. She said we were taking a road trip. That road trip ended at President's College, another very prestigious high school where some of the greatest minds attended. The one caveat about this school, you lived there. My mom thought this was the solution to what she thought was my dilemma. What she didn't know was I didn't care about where I lived as long as it was with her. Needless to say, with tears and I guess some trifling, I convinced her it was not the place for me. This didn't stop her from shipping me off to live with my aunt and sister yet again. This didn't last very long, though. My sister had twin toddlers, and I might have made a conscious effort to make my sister be tired of me. I ended right back in Sofia and finished up most of high school there.